Hello everyone, this is my INS museum on World War I. So our first room will be causes of the war. So this was the most immediate cause of the war, which was Franz Ferdinand's assassination. This was the gun used to kill him. It was a Browning gun. I don't know the exact model right now off the top of my head, but it was a very old pistol. Why was he killed and why was it so important? I'll tell you why it's so important later. So Austria-Hungary was an empire that controlled many different countries that you might know nowadays as Slovakia, the Czech Republic, many different countries like Bosnia nowadays. So this guy, the Prince of Austria-Hungary, he visited the capital of Bosnia, and many Bosnian Serbs wanted to unite Bosnia and Serbia together, and they were very mad at the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. So this gang called the Black Hand decided to try and murder this guy when he came to Bosnia, and unfortunately it worked. Why was this so important though? It's because of alliances. This was another long-term cause of World War I. So after this guy, Franz Ferdinand, was killed, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, which caused Serbia's friend Russia to declare war on that, and then it turned into a whole domino effect with Germany, Britain, all these different countries coming in to help their allies, because alliance is a political agreement between countries to try and help each other, support each other, and these people wanted to join the war to gain a lot of different things. They wanted to show off their country, because nationalism is an ideology that prioritizes your own country. I love my country. I want everyone to know that I love my country. So by joining this war, they could prove themselves, and it also could help people enlist, saying, oh, you need to help your country, it's a duty. Another thing that really kickstarted the war was imperialism. So this is a map of Austria-Hungary and all of its countries that it controlled at the time. So and it shows imperialism. So imperialism is when you colonize different countries, and before the war, there was a scramble for Africa, which means that all the European countries basically were just trying to race to get these different countries in Africa to get their land, to get these riches, and honestly just to prove themselves as the strongest empire with the most amount of land ever. So this created a lot of tension and suspicion between countries. They were like thinking, why does this guy have so much? Why don't I have enough land? And it just made people not like each other. But what really made this tension turn into war? It was militarism, which I think was the most important one. So before the war, UK and Germany had an arms race to see who could build the most naval battleships, and these countries basically, they saw their friends have a bunch of tanks. Well, not tanks actually came on way later, but ships, armies. They knew that all their neighbors had them, so they were getting scared, they were getting suspicious, and they wanted their own army. But after you do get an army and you spend a bunch of money on it, what are you going to do with it? You want to test it out and you want to use it, which is the reason why the war started, in my opinion. Why it's the most important one. So, after the war started, what was life in combat like in the trenches? So, I want to talk about this first, which is PAL's battalion. So, in Britain, they just relied on volunteers. They didn't have a massive army like the other ones, so they introduced this thing called PAL's battalions, where they would encourage people from the same workforce, from the same places like Liverpool, Hull, London, to join together. And while this was good because it increased the amount of enlisted people, it was really bad because obviously in battles like the Somme, or battles like this guy's talking about, a lot of people just die at the same time. 400 people dying dead around me, and this would mean massive destruction on towns. Whole towns of men would just be gone in 5 seconds. It was horrible. So what did they eat in these trenches? Now, Britain actually did win in terms of carbs, in terms of meat. They had meat that could be turned into stew, but over time, obviously, materials became more scarce, particularly for Germany. They didn't really have much food at the end of the war, and they had to rely on turnips. But yeah, Germany did have a lot of alcohol, so that was pretty good for them. This is a trench. What were trenches like? So they were 6 feet tall, just about the height of a man. So if you get onto the step and your head is out, you could get shot by a sniper. That's why they had parapets there. And yeah, while you might think they were long and straight like this is only a tiny part of it. They were actually completely zigzagged. Why? Because if a shell lands right here, there's a wall that covers the other people. They can hide, and it can contain shell blasts in one place, so it doesn't damage everything and kill a bunch of people. So let me show you guys So this is no man's land, and they had a bunch of barbed wire so you could catch onto people's uniforms and just stop them from going to their trench. This is the front line where everyone was fighting. Support trench to provide additional strength. And then the reserve line, reserve trench, which was mostly just for patching people up or just to hold extra stuff. This was trench foot. Conditions in the trenches were disgusting, and because they were always standing in muddy water and cold water, it started this condition called trench foot, which is where, your feet would turn red or blue and they would get cuts everywhere in your tissues, and it would increase the risk of infection. And of course, infection was so common back then, and it sometimes got so bad that people had to amputate. Actually, it was very common. Amputation was very common. So later on in the war, I think around it says here, poison gas was introduced. Now, chlorine gas was, if you don't know chlorine, when it interacts with water, and your bodies are made of water, it becomes acid. And this was very destructive in, people's mouths, people's eyes. And it was a big shock to these people. So here's a line of British soldiers coming back from the front lines. They put someone who could see in the front, and then everyone in the back would just go blindly. Another gas was phosgene, and you couldn't see it. That's why it was so scary, and you couldn't feel the effects of it until 24 hours after. And it counted for most of the gas fatalities, which is 6 out of 7. Mustard gas was much less deadly at first, but it could form into liquid pools in the ground in the trenches, so that became very, very dangerous. So to combat these, obviously, they introduced gas masks, and they got better over time. This is a newer one, and over the years, they kept on just changing it to make it better and protect their soldiers. Now, these soldiers also had to carry a humongous, heavy pack on their backs. So they had to carry all this stuff, but the most interesting thing is these puttees. The British people adopted these from the Indians, and it's just long strips of cloth, and they would wrap it around their feet to avoid water from getting in and obviously giving them trench foot. They would also have these humongous packs on their backs, which were designed so they could distribute weight and be put on easily, and it carried a bunch of stuff like knives. Yeah, you can read it there. Here's a pickle hulb hat, and at the start of the war, Britain used cloth caps, which are pretty good for camouflage, but they did not help your head from, they didn't protect your head at all. But I think the worst one was the Germans, because this was obviously very noticeable for a sniper or marksman to kill them. Now, propaganda and censorship. This is in Mr. Tan's room. So this poster shows a brutal gorilla, which symbolizes Germany, and he's holding this thing called culture, which means culture in German, and he's holding this woman, this half-naked woman, making men think, I want to save my lady. It could symbolize neutral countries like Belgium or even American women themselves, and it's kind of saying, this is our enemy, you gotta fight it. He's trying to take over our land, and this guy is coming onto American soil. He's trying to come into America and do this to your ladies. So this really appealed to all the men to try and, go against Germany, because this is what they thought the enemy looked like. Well, not really, but what they act like. This was Lord Kitchener, who was the head of most of the military things. He controlled huge armies, and this actually wasn't even originally an enlistment poster. It was for a magazine, but yeah, because they made him look so intimidating, it was very famous, and it even inspired this other famous poster for the American Army from when they joined in 1917. Yeah. This is a censored letter from a soldier, and soldiers were allowed, of course, they were allowed to send letters home, but they weren't allowed to talk about how many troops there were, obviously, if in case it was infiltrated. But something surprising was they weren't even allowed to talk about what the trenches were like, because that could, of course, decrease morale at home and decrease the number of enlisted. Now, this was a censored newspaper from France, and France especially went heavy on this. You can see it down there, an unspoken ban on the word peace, and this is a very, very embarrassing for journalists, but it was needed, because if you did breach these rules on censorship that were shown in censorship books, you could face prison, fines, or even the shutdown of your company. You can see huge censored parts of it. Now, the white feather movement was a very controversial movement. It was when women, usually suffragettes, and it was really backed up by Emmeline Pankhurst. they would pin on white feathers onto men, and this was a really famous symbol of cowardice that was used in cockfighting. And of course, it did make people join the army, but it was very humiliating because sometimes these men would show off missing limbs, or maybe they were too young, so it really just wasn't that good, and it was trying to encourage the wrong people sometimes. "It'll be over by Christmas" was a really famous slogan, and it was kind of to tell these people that you should join for a small adventure, and then they find out it's a 4-year war and they can't get out of it. Now the armistice. So this is a poem written by John McRae, who's a Canadian Commonwealth soldier, and he served in Flanders and Belgium. And he is talking about, the fallen soldiers, please don't forget us. And then he's also showing us the contrast between the dead bodies and these beautiful poppies that have appeared in no man's land. Why do poppies appear in no man's land? I'll tell you. So, this is a model of a poppy, by the way. Why were poppies a symbol of remembrance? These symbolize remembrance due to their association with World War I, because the dead bodies, the dead soldiers, the dead horses, all of these different things, as well as the nitrogen that was released from the shells, it created the best place for poppies, which are weeds, to grow. And these were the first flowers that bloomed, and yeah, they were just everywhere on no man's land, and it was kind of like a symbol of hope, these dead bodies, and then a beautiful flower comes out of it. Now, how is Remembrance Day celebrated? It is on the 11th November every single year, and many schools held a minute of silence and also a parade on the nearest Sunday by all the armed forces. They usually end up in a war memorial, which every single town has. That's what they do in my home country in Nottingham, in a town near Nottingham. Henry Gunther was the last soldier killed in World War I. He was an American soldier with German ancestry, and he ran in front of the Germans. Why? It was because, many people say it was because he was demoted to private for basically telling his friends, do not join the war, and he wanted to prove himself as a true American. He didn't want anyone to think he was a German sympathizer, which he might have been, we don't know. Now, this is where the armistice was signed. It was signed in a train car in the middle of the woods in France. This was done for privacy and also to just save Germany from all that humiliation of doing it in a place like Paris or London. And it was also good because it could protect them from spies and other people who want to listen and see what's going on. So, medicine and evacuations. This is the chain of evacuations. I'm going to talk about it. These are stretcher bearers. They were volunteers, and there weren't many of them, by the way, which made it really hard to get to a lot of people. So they would go out where there was pauses in the fighting, and they would go out and get these people. But it was a really hard job because you had to obviously take these heavy men in the middle of all this mud while trying not to jostle them too much, or it could be deadly. And there weren't many of these people, and it required at least 2 people in dry weather to pick up one. Imagine when it's just rained. It'd be crazy. This is another part of the chain of evacuations. It's kind of in the middle. It's where, originally it was where people would get sorted to go, is it too serious? Is it not that serious? Can we move them somewhere else? But because there were so many serious cases that needed urgent help, it did more operations than base hospitals themselves, because they didn't have time to send all these people who are literally about to die with bones coming out of their skin back to the base hospital. This is the chain of evacuation. So it would start off with the stretch bearers. It would go to this place where it was just treating normal injuries, and then they'd send you to the casualty clearing station, which is what I just talked about, where they would basically sort you or clear you quickly. And if you were stable enough to leave the casualty clearing station, you would go to the base hospital, which is where they also treated civilians. And it was way further because they had to go on a train there, which is why a lot of people went to the CCS. This is a Thomas splint. So it was invented to help people who have broken their thigh bones, because before 80% of people would have to die. But thanks to this machine, which pulled your legs and lengthened it and reduced the risk of your jagged bones, hitting each other and causing immense pain, it actually saved a bunch of people, and everyone was told to use it and know how to use it. These were hospital ships. Now, in the these are actually very, very big in the Gallipoli campaign because that was in a peninsula, but basically these ships would just take people to hospitals and treat people on the ships. They were protected, so with this huge Red Cross, people knew not to shoot them. Changing roles of women. So during World War I, when all these men went away to fight who was going to do all these jobs? Women, of course. So we'll talk about suffragettes first. Emily Pankhurst was a very, very famous suffragette, and she did back the white feather movement, by the way. But anyway, so suffragettes were people who really, really wanted to get the vote, because it's a really big thing, And these people would do insane things like arson, do crazy acts in public, like even throwing herself in front of a horse. That's what one lady did before the war started, though. After the war, and after all these women were doing a bunch of jobs, they kind of wanted more independence. They proved themselves that they can do things, and they wanted the right to vote to prove it. Okay, sorry, there's people in the back making a lot of noise. Anyway, these people also worked in transport, and this is a woman who was a railway porter. So these women, a lot of them are called clippies because they're bus conductors, and that's the sound that the bus people make. And yeah, they basically just drove a lot of trams, a lot of trains. Yeah. This was munitionettes football. So I'll tell you about the munitionettes in a second, but many people working in munitions, and these people needed a way to raise morale. So what they did was they started with football, and they would have so many games. There were so many good teams. Like this is, I think it's the Dick Kerr ladies. It's the Dagenham Invincibles who won so many of these games, and this really improved their morale. But even though they were so good, after the men arrived and they came back, they were forced to quit again. Now, munitionettes. When everyone was at war, they needed shells, they needed munitions, so they hired a bunch of women to go do this. And they were called canary girls because the nitric caused women's skin to turn yellow temporarily. Even little kids that they birth turn yellow, and this is a canary. It's really, really yellow. Now, the land girls. So to work in the Women's Land Army was created to help make women join and do farming. So the food was very scarce, and many people have gone to war, so they need someone to manage the farms, and they got these women to do it. Famous battles. So, this is my favorite room. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the Battle of Verdun. This is the longest battle in history, which lasted for 303 days. It was because France had this fortress town called Verdun, and they did not want to lose it, and Germany knew that, so they were trying to bleed France dry for ages. But France invented this slogan, "Ils ne passeront pas." So they did everything they could to stop Germany from passing, and it worked, because even though a lot of people died, they did protect Verdun in the end. So this is the Sacred Way. Oh my god. So basically, they only had one road connecting, and there was a truck every 14 seconds, because it was just one road, because every single other one was getting intercepted by German people. This was the Battle of the Somme. Oh god, I wrote something here, but I'll just input it later. I'll send a screenshot. But anyway, the Battle of the Somme was a big battle. So it was very, very bloody, particularly because of the first day of it. The British had just bombed Germans, and they thought it would kill them, but their trenches were so strong. They were so strong that they lasted, and then the British commanders just told these people, go out onto the field, just walk to their side, because obviously they thought all the Germans were dead, but they weren't, so they all just got shot down. It was a very bloody day in history. It was very sad and depressing. This is Vimy Ridge. Vimy Ridge was so there was German people that's the wrong one. Anyway, it's a really big event in the Canadian military, because the Canadians had just fought their way up, and the Germans had captured the place, but the Allies had been trying to get it back for years and years and years and years, but they only got it back after the Canadians, and they did it because they learned from the Battle of the Somme, and they built so many tunnels, and they made everything so organized that they won this battle very quickly. And look, these are people celebrating. This is Passchendaele. It wasn't as bloody as the Somme, but it was very, very dangerous. This is the one I got it mixed up with. So these allies were kind of in a bulge in German territory, so they were surrounded by Germans. It was very, 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 very dangerous, because Germans could basically kill them from 3 different directions. It was disgusting, and there was heavy rain every single day, and there was so many deep shell holes, and these Canadians all came in and they tried to make paths, but even that, it caused so many casualties, just like the Canadian Arthur Curry. He didn't want to do it because he knew that it would kill a bunch of people, and it did in the end, but they did win. So here is the bulge. This is where they did it, and they fought all the way over to Passchendaele, and you can see the Germans were all on three sides of them. Now, this was Gallipoli. It was in Turkey, so they wanted to clear the way for people to get to Russia, to help their friend Russia, and so they would infiltrate Turkey to try and bring down the Ottoman Empire, but they were too strong. They failed, and it was horrible because the stench here was disgusting. They weren't used to all this weather, and they were out in the open on a beach, so it was very easy to kill them. It was horrible, and also the Anzacs Cove was only 6 kilometers long, so it was very, very overcrowded, and the sanitation was horrible. The heat was horrible. As you can see here, the everything would turn black in less than 24 hours. It was disgusting. Flies everywhere. Like, Turkey is such a hot place. Imagine being at war. Disgusting. Oh no. Okay. Anyway, the Christmas truce. The Christmas truce was a brief stop. It was a brief, spontaneous ceasefire on the Western Front. And it usually happened in places where there was a lot of Saxon soldiers, German soldiers who had lived in Britain. So basically, on Christmas Day, these German soldiers came out and they were like, Britain, come, we're singing Silent Night. And everyone started exchanging gifts and celebrating Christmas together. It was very beautiful. It was very brief, though. Okay, what did they do on this day? Many accounts say they played football, and while people say that it's not true, it might have been. We don't know, but I strongly believe it is. Along with that, they also did haircuts on each other because Germans had better grooming kits, and they would joke about each other's appearance and give each other gifts. And these are the gifts that they would give each other. So British people actually got this tin that was issued to every single one of them. So they would usually just trade things that were in these tins, and they would trade buns, pudding, sausages, food, and even like things cut out from their uniforms they would give each other, which is very, very sweet. It revealed how deep human connection was. It really did. Okay, now, the letter from the front. This guy is talking about what he did on Christmas truce, and he's, saying that Germans were fed up with the war, just like that, and it really shows that these were just ordinary men. Yeah, okay. I don't know. Okay, sorry, that was just someone talking to me. But anyway, they were fed up with the war and short on rations, and it just shows that these men were all just ordinary guys, and the Germans showed the British that they were ordinary guys. They're just here trying to fight for their lives, Oh my god. Okay, the Sainsbury advert. The Sainsbury's 2014 Truce advert was released on the 100th anniversary, and it's very, for me, it's pretty is it romanticized? Yes. And it's kind of heartless, in my opinion. Like I said here, many people think it's heartless because it's trying to use this suffering to get people to buy their products, and it's kind of unethical to some people. But yeah, it does spread a lot of awareness and increase, remembrance. It makes people want to remember, and it educates people about what happened that day. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to input the picture of the Psalm one because for some reason, I think I made 2 artifacts and this one is the wrong one. Obviously, it has no writing, but I'm going to put it in a second. Thank you so much. Bye. How do I stop? Okay. Bye.